with millions of dollars potentially at stake. Both sides in the Take Care of Maya civil trial are delivering their closing arguments. Gregory Anderson is delivering them on behalf of the plaintiffs, the Kowalski family. He'll get a first bite at the apple. The defense will then go and he'll have the last word as well. Let's pick it up right after the sidebar broke up.
Objections overruled. You may continue, Mr. Anderson.
All right. So back there, I'm not sure who said what, but I'm pretty sure with Beata's personality that what she did was start to question them and say, we were just here 6 days ago, and by the way, we've been coming here. You're supposed to be our hospital. You're supposed to be our doctors. Why are you putting us through this? Why are you questioning everything that I say here? I don't want Maya to have a blood pressure cuff because do you understand about allodynia? Do you understand about how this disease is? I've been coming here for forever. Why don't you people pick up on this? And that ticked them off because she was challenging them. And there must have been some words back and forth because somehow, somewhere, they decided to completely change over the diagnoses, and whether they did it immediately in the record or whether they simply did it in every way they approached everything and everybody that they told outside of the hospital, there's no question that they tried to change the narrative here. And walking in as a normal family with a child with a debilitating disease, they walked out suddenly with Beata as the enemy and Maya as a liar. That Maya was making all of this up and that Beata was somehow encouraging it. So whatever happened, and I'm pretty sure it was that Beata started to ask people's names. And she started to take down those names and she started to ask very, very pointed questions. Because remember, within the first 24 hours they were there, they called risk management. Within 24 hours with the patient they'd had for a year and a half, they called risk management. Something else very interesting here. Remember one of my first witnesses, Debbie Hanna? She was the social worker that was brought in. And it wasn't her regular gig, but she was brought in to help on this. And she sat down with the Kowalskis, and she said that they were like every other family with a child that was in a lot of pain and with a desperate disease. They were incredibly concerned. But she didn't see any signs whatsoever of abnormal behavior. And this is the social worker. This is the one that's supposed to pick up on stuff like this. And there's another thing I want you to keep in the back of your mind. She was never allowed and never did finish her psychosocial evaluation, which is what you put together to see whether there are any psychosocial problems. Are there any psychiatric issues going on here? Is there something going on that maybe we didn't spot over the past 15 months and 50 doctors? She was not allowed to complete that, and risk management took over. It's very strange, very strange. After that, what did we see? We saw Sally Smith brought in. What the heck was Sally Smith doing there? Why were they bringing her in? Why did they have her checking records on October 8th, the next day, without the Kowalskis' authority, by the way, and without their consent and without their knowledge? Why was she going in there and looking back at all these records? What was her role here? Sally Smith eventually comes in to see them, and she doesn't identify herself as Sally Smith. Whatever she's trying to say up there, you know she came in a lab coat, and she came in with her doctor's pass. You know she walked in, and she started to try to get information from them without identifying herself. She was trying to set up a case or some complaint or something. She was the hammer. She was the hammer that they might need down the road. Should the Kowalskis come back, make any complaints? Remember, this was a place where if a person complained, there was retribution. Dr. Corcoran, if a person complained, then there was a chance they could lose their jobs. Nobody was complaining up and down, and no one wanted to hear any complaints about them. And here was Beata taking down names. They panicked, and they decided they weren't going to let this brusque lady with an Eastern European accent coming in and telling them how to do their job and what they could do and not do and what tests they could do and not do, right? They got really, really upset at being bossed around by this lady. And she was a nurse too, which made it even worse. By the way, why are they so worked up about Beata Kowalski, an infusion nurse, giving her child infusions? I never made the connection there as to what that's supposed to signify to anyone. So after that, you can see here, well, beforehand, you can see the times leading up to it. After this, there's a psychological evaluation on January 6, 2017 by Dr. Duncan. You got that back there, there's no problem found. They bring in Dr. Lewis, who was working for the state. He was not one of their doctors, he was working for the state. You gotta look beyond what you're being told to see what was really going on here. Dr. Lewis, whatever Maya's saying, he's putting down what he wants to say to try to support a narrative. But even he can't bring himself to say that this is psychosomatic. He says you got to get a pediatric neurologist to look at this to confirm whether or not there's a physiological basis, right? So Sally Smith is in here, and all of a sudden Sally Smith starts running the show. She was an apparent agent. Under the definition that you're going to get, I want you to check yes on apparent agent if you agree that we've proven through the testimony of Elena Kushner, who also, amazingly enough, had an Eastern European accent, and also had the same experience of Sally Smith coming in a white lab coat and starting to ask questions. No introduction. No, hi, I'm Dr. Smith. I'm here to help you. What can I do? Anything like that. No, probing questions to try to see what could be uncovered. The Kowalskis became the enemies. The Kowalskis had become the enemies, right? And remember, this was a hospital that was under immediate jeopardy of losing its license, right? These people were worked up, and they didn't want anybody rocking the boat. But in any event, they talk the Kowalskis into staying. They tell them, we're going to help here, we're going to help there. And Beata says, no, we're going to go back, like we did on the first, to Dr. Hannah, and we're going to complete the ketamine infusions because you guys can't help us. No doubt Beata brought her in to see if there could be an intubation and greater amounts of ketamine to try to get her out of this crisis. And when they couldn't do it, she concluded, why are we here? And tried to leave. And she was told, well, if you leave, then you're AMA, and we're going to call security. And that's in the records. So they were forced to stay. And as much as they try to dig around in the records, ask yourself, do you believe they really wanted to stay in that hospital when there was no reason to do so? Maya was not getting the care she wanted and the care that the parents wanted. You know, there's a lot of people watching this. There's a lot of people looking at this. There are CRPS patients. There are parents who have children in crisis trying to figure out what to do. There's a lot of people who are paying attention to what you're doing here. And in this instance...
Sorry. Objection is sustained.
Thank you.
And it's important here to consider what was going on behind the scenes. So through the course of the time from October 7th up until the 13th, when this order was obtained, they desperately wanted to get out of that place, but were not allowed out of this place, although they tried to talk them into. Johns Hopkins did their best to try to convince the Kowalskis that, well, she's got withdrawal symptoms, she'll have withdrawal symptoms, we need to wean her down, well, everything you've been doing is wrong. And you know what? The Kowalskis were at least listening to them. They didn't buy it, but they were at least listening to them. They weren't uncooperative about this, but all they wanted to do was get out of there and get someplace where Maya could be properly treated. That's the reason they came in. They had no reason to stay there. They didn't want Maya under this hospital's care if the hospital couldn't do anything more for them. That's called false imprisonment. And that's where you would check yes on that particular one. I'm skipping around here, but in your verdict form, it's interesting, you've got different events listed, okay? And you're going to be asked individual questions about individual events. And so this is one of them. Another one is when when Kathy Beatty and company pinned her down on January 6th. That's another one. Right. He's right. I need to talk about the suicide. I'm interested here in the circumstances living up to Beata. You know, her motto was live with passion, right? And she had everything in the world to live with, live for. And she died with the same passion. Consider the fact that she came from a communist country and saw her father dragged out of the house by the powers that be, right? Beata Kowalski gave her life for her child because she knew Beata was prescient. She knew something was going on in that hospital, and she had been told repeatedly about how her daughter was suffering. And she knew enough to just listen to her daughter. And you heard the phone calls to know what was going on. And every time somebody saw her daughter.
Maya Kowalski getting emotional there in the courtroom as the attorney representing the family talks about the death of her mother. We'll get a break in here, get you back for more right after this.
There's a tragic outcome in this case.
Civil trial that is the focus of the Netflix documentary, Take Care of Maya.
Now a misdiagnosis tore their family apart.
They continue to accuse Jack and Beata of being child abusers.
Jack called me and said Beata just hung herself.
Is the hospital they're suing responsible for what happened?
The Take Care of Maya trial. Trial coverage today on Court TV.
Back to the courtroom we go. Greg Anderson delivering the closing argument on behalf of the plaintiffs in the Take Care of Maya civil trial. Let's go back into the courtroom.
Daughter. Any of the neighbors that got in, any of the priest, anyone else who got in, she was pumping them for information. She knew exactly what was going on here. And so as Maya started to get worse and worse and worse, the anxiety of Beata went up and up and up until it came about finally that Beata determined unless something drastic was done, there's a pretty good chance her daughter was going to die in this hospital. Why? She'd already seen a friend's daughter die from CRPS. CRPS can kill you. And in this instance, where you've got someone who is becoming so weak that they're laying down and they can't even hold themselves up, you're subject to blood clots that can go to the heart and kill. And that's what Beata was concerned about. There was retaliation against me because they knew I was going after the ICU. Filing charges with me with DCF automatically makes them automatically immune. But what it says here is that Beata knew what was going on with her daughter and knew she had to do something drastic. She knew they were retaliating against her. She knew that she was the key. If she was in the picture, Maya was never going to get out of there. And it was likely that Maya was going to end up in some kind of foster care and in some situation where she would be even worse.
Objection.
That's in the
Legal basis?
The legal basis is the immunity. We're not responsible for.
No, I've already instructed the jury on that.
Okay.
She knew if she did not take herself out of the picture, that it was likely, it was a probability that her daughter would die. The best hope would be that her daughter lived, but was with some foster parents who did not understand the disease, or was placed in a situation where she was going to be in psychiatric care. And the rest of her life, Beata knew, because she was a nurse, that Maya would be followed through her entire life, dogged by these allegations that somehow there was a psychosis going on. Afterwards, Dr. Tepa Sanchez writes and says, she's talking to Dr. Laura Vos at this time, I learned today that Ketamine Girl's mom committed suicide yesterday. Sorry to say my prediction was correct. That means it had happened before. They knew about it, and yet they still kept the pressure on. They still kept the pressure on Beata. Oh my God. They still thought somehow this was the right thing to push Beata to the edge and over. They knew she was on the edge, and they kept up the pressure. There's no question but that this suicide was caused directly by their actions. On the verdict form, what you're going to see is a few things, but one of them is there's two bases. And you heard Dr. Richards testify about both of them. One is, was it a substantial factor? Were their actions a substantial factor in the suicide? I submit, absolutely. The second was, did she operate from an irresistible impulse? The irresistible impulse in this instance was the maternal instinct. There was nothing she could do about it. She knew if she didn't protect her daughter here, she was going to lose her daughter. And Beata knew also, she thought through the effect of her being out of the picture. She knew it'd be tough on Kyle. She knew it would be tough on Maya and Jack. But she figured having Maya alive was better than losing Maya. She knew they could get through somehow. But she could not stand the thought of losing her baby girl. Please take care of Maya. Don't make her suffer anymore. She doesn't deserve that. No child deserves that. Insofar as the verdict on suicide, I request that you check, yes, it was caused by them. And it's important, very important, that you answer questions 45, 46, 47, 48, and 55 in the positive, if you want a recovery for Jack and for Kyle. These are the causes of action for wrongful death, and they are allowed to recover based on being beneficiaries of the estate. So that if you want to award damages to Jack for the loss of his wife and to Kyle for the loss of his mother, then you have to determine that there was an intentional infliction of emotional distress. And under that definition, by any definition, this was emotional distress that was absolutely outrageous. You just don't do what they did to a little girl like this. You just don't take away a gift. You don't tell her that her mother's crazy. You don't tell her that her mother is in a mental institution. You don't pat her, and you know what? They were patting her. Beatty would come in and pat her on the way in and way out. She was trying to develop evidence so that she could say, oh, she never reacted to that. She must not have had allodynia. That's why she was doing it. You don't put a child on your lap. You do not cuddle with a child, and you sure don't kiss a child. There was no authorization whatsoever, and Maya loathed Kathy Beatty. Remember the attorney, Zimmerman, who said it came off in waves how much she disliked Kathy Beatty. Maya did not consent to anything, and what they did was continue to put the pressure on all the way through this. So let me talk a little bit about your verdict form. There's so much to talk about in these cases, it's easy to get bogged down on it. Under false imprisonment, your claim 1, I submit there's more than enough evidence to show that they were falsely imprisoned. Maya was falsely imprisoned on the occasion of October 7th through October 13th. And then you're asked to put down damages for her pain and suffering and for mental and psychological expenses and the reasonable value of hospitalization. And that question is repeated several times through this on each one of the first two claims. What I suggest you do in trying to determine exactly how much to award is that you make a determination of the gross amount of pain and suffering, loss of capacity to enjoy life, mental anguish, and you determine the big picture, because you're going to have to determine that for intentional infliction of emotional distress and malpractice, okay? And then you go back and you assign a percentage of that to...
All right, we're going to slip in a commercial break as we approach the top of the hour. Pulling at the heartstrings there a little bit, and now getting into the finances and the verdict form. Let's get a break. Back after this.